Hi, I'm Jilly G. Welcome to my kitchen. Today I'm going to tell you my story. And while I do that, I'm going to cut up some fruit. I have some plums and some peaches. Bowl for garbage. I just want them in smallish pieces here. Wrong bowl. When you have a lot of fruit that is really ripe, you got to do something with it. Try to keep as much juice with the fruit. So first off, I just want to say thank you to everybody that has come over from Trenton Alley. And everyone that's liked and subscribed to my videos and my patrons. And if you don't know who Trenton Alley are, that's my brother. And he has his own YouTube channel with his wife. And as some of you know, he was my inspiration for making this channel. So growing up, my house was always the house that had ingredients to make food, not ready-made food. So we rarely had any kind of prepackaged anything. And because of that, just means that you make everything homemade. And so at a young age, I started baking, I should say. Well, baking and cooking. As some of you might know, my mom was a single mom, which means that she wasn't home a lot, and we were home alone, which was fine because it was the 80s and a lot of people were home alone, or a lot of kids were home alone. So my sister and I started experimenting in the kitchen. No, it wasn't even really experimenting, it was just baking. And we started making brownies and cookies. And then we would take our creations and our little brother in his stroller and go to my mom's work and deliver our treats and give her a little visit. These plums are so messy. So once I started baking, I realized how much I really enjoyed doing it and how much fun it was. And so we used to make cookies, well, at least once a week, sometimes more. And then you start making other things like brownies and some cakes, just other things. Cheesecake, although it was a no-bake cheesecake, so that was easy. And then when I got into high school, I thought I wanted to be a chef, but not just a chef. I wanted to be a pastry chef because I like the baking part of things more than the cooking part, although I do love to cook too. So then when I was about 18, I started making pies, and I started making all of the pies for holidays and whatever other occasion. I'd say I've made more pies than any other thing besides cakes. Plums are done. Save your juice. Peaches. You could peel these for whatever you're doing and cut off any really bad spots. But I'm going to keep the peel on. So not only was I baking, I started making Thanksgiving dinner, which is a big feat. You have to learn how to time everything. It's a lot of food to make, but it's also a lot of fun. And of course, family dinners and whatever else, regular dinners. But also during that time, I was sick a lot. I read somewhere quite a while ago that the average person that gets diagnosed with celiac disease, it takes about 10 years. 10 years before they get the actual diagnosis. And for me, it was about 15 years. I have a lemon. If you get a lemon seed on your peach, you think it's a worm. So I was about 19 when I started going to the doctor. And fast forward about 15 years with a diagnosis of celiac disease, something I'd never heard of before. And even the doctor that diagnosed me, he had printed off about 27 pages from the internet and told me, here you go. This is everything I could find. You'll do better researching it by yourself than with what I have to tell you. And that day, I ate my last gluten-y meal. It wasn't even a very good meal. It was the food court at a mall. It didn't occur to me to have one last meal, what it would have been. I didn't care at that point. I'd been so sick for so long, I didn't care. I just ate and went on to my new way of life and eating and cooking. So there was a grocery store that I used to shop at. It was kind of considered a health food store. Had a lot of vitamins and things, all natural things. And I figured they would have to have the type of things that I needed, even though I didn't know what I needed yet. I just knew that it had to be gluten-free. I didn't even know what to look for. I just knew that basically anything with wheat was now off limits. And so I learned how to read labels, and the internet only had 2 websites that was anything to do with celiac disease, and it was mostly just kind of a, here's your symptoms, here's what people have done to help manage their symptoms, And once in a while, there would be a question about food products, but nothing really very helpful. So I felt like I had to reinvent the wheel of cooking. I felt like it was a whole new thing, which it was, but not in the way that I thought. I bought a couple of cookbooks where there was only 2 at the time that had anything about gluten-free. And so I bought those, and most of those had ingredients I'd never even heard of, let alone where to find them or how to really use them. And I didn't really like that idea very much, that I would have to start over with everything. I had a lot of recipes, a lot of family recipes that I really loved. I didn't want to give those up. And then one day at the grocery store, while looking for gluten-free things, they had 4 different mixes that you could buy. One was chocolate chip cookies, brownies, a cake mix, and a bread mix. 4. That's all there was. And having really never baked from a mix before, I didn't want to start now. But it was nice that there was something available. And so I just kind of started living on a diet of meat and vegetables and fruits, and just eliminated any kind of baked anything. And I didn't really care that much about bread to begin with. I missed the convenience of it, you know, a sandwich or something, but bread wasn't that big of a deal. And I know there's a lot of people that have celiac disease that miss bread. There was one loaf of bread that was gluten-free that was available, and it was in the freezer section, and it was about this big. And back then it was $7, which is really expensive, even for you know, that many years ago. And of course I bought it because it was what I could have, and it was terrible. It was terrible. I didn't buy it again because it was terrible. And it was so little, you could barely get, you know, a sandwich out of it. Now that this is full, I'm gonna put it into my big pot. There was one brand of pasta available, gluten-free pasta. It was made with corn, equally as terrible as the bread that was available. Bought that once, and it stuck together in the pan of water, and it looked like cream corn. There was so much corn starch coming off of the corn. It resulted in a stuck together gluey pasta mess, which all went in the garbage because you couldn't do anything with it. Even if you added sauce to it, it didn't really help to separate it or do anything. It was just one big clumpy, soggy mess. So I didn't buy pasta for years because there were so limited and so few ingredients available that I could find. And Amazon wasn't what it is now. The internet, you know, there wasn't hardly anything. So I didn't even know really where to look besides the grocery store. And just regular grocery stores didn't have anything. And once you start reading labels, you realize there's a lot of things that are gluten-free already. And you notice that nowadays there's a lot of things that have a gluten-free label that was naturally gluten-free to begin with, which I appreciate the effort. Learning to read labels is a challenge for sure. I got really familiar with phone numbers on packages. And sometimes I would buy something and second guess myself and sit out in the parking lot calling the number on the package to find out for sure. It was always very helpful, actually. At least they seemed to know what was happening or what was in their products. So one day I was at the grocery store and I was in the checkout aisle. We were just looking at the magazines. And there was a magazine that it was called Living Without. I'll put a link to that somewhere below if I can find it. But it talked about having all kinds of food allergies and intolerances and all kinds of any kind of ailment food related. And so I started flipping through it, and there was a lot of information about gluten-free cooking and gluten-free products, and I'd never seen anything like that before, so I bought it. And I took it home, and in the back of it, it had all kinds of substitutions for any kind of anything that you would need to substitute. And it also had some different gluten-free flour mixes. And I've talked about this before in my flour video, but I'll give you a refresher here. So there was a mix that you could make yourself, and I'd never even looked for gluten-free flours. I didn't even know to look for them. I had seen the mixes, so I knew there was stuff kind of available, but just flour on its own, I couldn't find anything. Or I didn't really know to look for it. And the flours that were listed, I never could find most of the ones that they were asking for, but I was able to find almond flour, coconut flour, rice flour, and the tapioca starch, and potato starch, which I kind of experimented with in the beginning between a mixture of tapioca and potato starch with my flour mix, but I ended up just sticking with the tapioca because I liked the end result better. So once I found those flours, and I took them home and I mixed them together, And I've also talked about this in another recipe, but I also bought xanthan gum because it was what everything called for. You know, all of these different things to make everything stick together. And so I never added it to my flour mix to begin with, but I would add it in separately when I was making a recipe. And so when I decided to stop using it, it was an easy thing to do because I'd never added it to my flour to begin with. So once I got familiar with starting to bake gluten-free, I decided if I had my own flour, I would start making some of my own recipes instead of these recipes in a cookbook. I'd go back to my recipes I grew up with. And once I started doing that and being very successful at that, I decided to try my hand at making bread. And I'd never made bread before. My mom was always the bread maker in the family. And I'd seen it done. You know, I kind of had an idea of how it was supposed to work, but I never really made it. And so I felt like it was kind of a win-win because gluten-free bread does not do anything that regular bread does. And so once you get that in your mind that it's not going to act the same way, you have better success instead of trying to recreate something exactly the same. So I started experimenting with bread and my gluten-free flour. And I had also bought the flour mix that was available. And it turned out terrible every single time. Terrible. It was a brick. It was so heavy and so dense. Even toasted, it didn't toast. And I figured maybe there's a reason why I wasn't a bread baker, is I was just unsuccessful, but it was really the ingredients and it was just terrible. I'd wasted so much time and money on ingredients to just throw them away. It was just, I could never get it to work. I tried bread machines, I tried my flour, I tried the bread mix, I tried everything I could. I tried different pans. And every single time it would turn out bigger than what you could get in the freezer section. So at least there was that. It was a bigger loaf of bread, but it was terrible. So I gave up on bread for a long time and decided it was okay because I could at least have cookies again and zucchini bread, cake, pies. I still have those. Bread wasn't that big of a deal. That is a heaping 8 cups of peaches, the juice of 1 lemon. I will stick this in the freezer and make pies or whatever else you want. Peach cobbler in the middle of winter. So my first few Thanksgivings of being gluten-free, I didn't have stuffing. I made my stuffing recipe with rice instead of bread. And it turned out good. It was a nice side dish, but of course it wasn't stuffing. And because I make Thanksgiving for all of my family dinners, I started making gravy from the beginning. Really never had a trouble with gravy. It always worked out really well for me, so at least that was going for me. But I'd had a lot of other failures with other things. In fact, when I first started cooking gluten-free, a lot of people, were excited to have some kind of dessert. And then sometimes it was really terrible, but they suffered through like I did. So when I first went gluten-free, on a day-to-day basis for myself, not a whole lot changed, besides my ingredients, of course. But from a day-to-day basis, I hardly ever ate out. And so I didn't really know what restaurants had gluten-free or if they even did or anything like that. And so because I didn't do that very often, it wasn't that big of a deal to not do it now. But it kind of puts a damper on your social life or your friends and family. Hey, let's go out and get a hamburger or something. No thanks. You start turning them down. And because I didn't know really about restaurants, and again, I'm trying to research it online, really wasn't very helpful. Most restaurants or fast food places didn't have it on their menu of what was or what wasn't gluten-free. And so I would take my lunchbox to restaurants and nobody ever said anything, but that way I could still go and eat. I'd also been known to show up at somebody's house with my own plate wrapped in plastic wrap for a dinner party just because I didn't know. They didn't know. I didn't even know. I didn't expect anybody else to know how to make a gluten-free meal. So I was about 1.5 years in of being gluten-free when all of a sudden you started hearing it everywhere. Everybody was gluten-free. Everything was gluten-free. It became this big fad diet that I thought, well, maybe are there really that many people that have celiac disease? Or I know there's other things that people have that you go on a gluten-free diet for as well, but I just thought maybe a lot of people have it and they're just discovering how to figure that out. And so there's more of us than what they realized. But at any rate, more and more products started becoming available and more products started labeling that they were gluten-free, which I thought was really helpful because it made reading labels so much easier, which I still still do, because it's just a habit. It's just a habit to always look, because even now there's still a lot of things that don't label it gluten-free. And so you still have to read the labels. But that was a really helpful thing when it became a fad diet. It was disappointing at the same time, but it was really helpful because more and more restaurants started offering gluten-free things. And at least at any rate, it was getting to be more known, so people don't look at you like you're crazy when you're sitting in a restaurant asking about a gluten-free menu for something people never heard of. But now they did. They had a little side menu that you could order from, which I didn't do very often then because it was so much more expensive. And it wasn't even anything fancy or really special. It was meat and vegetables cooked separately from all the other food, but twice the price. So I appreciated the effort that it was available, but I wasn't going to pay for something I could make in my own kitchen. But the disappointing part was, because it became so popular, people then didn't believe that you were sick, or that you had been sick, or that it was a serious thing. They just thought that you were on the diet fad and it didn't really matter. So because gluten-free was becoming more of a household name, more and more recipes were popping up everywhere of people that were doing their own experimenting, and gluten-free bread recipes started becoming available, more than just the one or two that I had found. And with easier to find ingredients, there's a lot of gluten-free flours that I've never used just because I couldn't find them when I first went gluten-free. And because I couldn't find them, I never used them, and don't use them now because I've been successful with what I've been doing. But I still think it's nice to explore other options. You know, there might be something out there that works just as good or even better. But as you've noticed in some of my recipes, I do use different flours for some different things. Just kind of a texture and a flavor, texture and a taste difference. And if you've made anything with my gluten-free flour, you'll notice the almond flour, it does give things a little bit of a gritty texture, which I don't mind. So then the keto diet came out, and a lot of people were also experimenting with low carb, which a lot of gluten-free stuff is low carb to begin with. I thought that was really helpful. More and more things were becoming available. More and more people were experimenting and putting out recipes. And in my family, we always used to joke that, I used to joke, it's changed over the years, but used to talk about opening a pie shop and then a bakery. And then of course it evolved into a gluten-free bakery. And now it's evolved into this, my own cooking show. And because of all of that, and becoming more popular, and things were more available, or because gluten-free was getting more widely known, a lot of new products were coming out on the grocery store shelves. Instead of just one terrible pasta, there was 4 or 5, and more bread choices, not just one in the freezer section. And some of them were equally terrible, but some of them were actually really good. It was, I think it was about a good 4 years into celiac disease before I started eating pasta again, just because I couldn't find one that I liked. So I kind of stopped looking, and just when you get used to not having it, you just kind of forget about it, or just don't make things that need pasta. So on my channel, some of my videos are naturally gluten-free already, and I know that they are. But when you're first starting out gluten-free, at least for me, I didn't think I could have anything again. I didn't even know. You'd look at every label and you don't even know what you're even looking for. So even my recipes that I have on here that are gluten-free already, I still call them gluten-free because they really truly are in my house. There's no cross-contamination. I don't cheat, and I rarely eat out in any restaurants. I think there's only 4 places that I'll go and actually eat the food that's there because I don't trust anywhere else. I was so sick for so long, and it was a really long road of recovery and learning to make gluten-free food and being successful at it. It was such a long road that it's not worth it to me to cheat, or even on the, once in a while it does happen where you get sick when you go out to eat, and it's not worth it. It takes too long to get feeling better again, and you realize how crappy you felt when it all comes back. And so everything I make is gluten-free, 100%. And even if it's just mayonnaise or chicken stock or whatever it is, I always look at my labels. And it doesn't always have to say gluten-free, because there's a lot of things out there that don't have the label of gluten-free. But I will still call the number or look online. Nowadays there's a lot of information available online. If I can't find it there, I won't buy it. Or if I call the number and they can't give me an answer, I won't buy that product. To me, it's just not worth it. If all you have to do to be healthy is just eat a certain way, I can do that. And you're probably wondering if I'm going to do anything with these peaches besides cut them up, but that will be another video. Whether you're just starting out on a gluten-free diet for whatever reason, or if you're 10 years more like me, I think we all have something to learn from each other. I love hearing new recipes or new ways that people have found to make things work. It's a really challenging thing to do. So if you band together and help each other out, everyone's more successful. And even share your failures. The best way to learn anyways is to make a mess of things and a disaster and do better next time. These peaches are amazing. So there's my story, or little bits and parts of it. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, let me know, and we'll see you on the next one.